Firstly, thank you for choosing our session today as part of your personal curated agenda. Really pleased to have with me some wonderful industry experts to talk on a subject very close to my heart. Firstly, we have Jackie Randhawa, who's a brand marketing strategist and a fellow Bloom member of mine. Secondly, we have Deborah King, the Vice President of Media Activation across paid social at the media agency Essence. Thirdly, we have Kayode Ijaola, the Group Trading Manager at Media IQ. And we have Paul Astbury, IAS's Head of Channel Sales across EMEA. So I'm really pleased that you could join me this morning. This subject is a real focus for IAS, not only in how we kind of hire and the teams that we have at our company, but also it's really important in the creation of our technology and how it's built and importantly how it's implemented by brands. And that's kind of our role, or the role of advertising in reflecting society and leading to its success, actually. Because I think it builds better conversations and better solutions for our clients. Over the past few years, responsibility across the industry has been very much part of a conversation. And in 2018, the Global Alliance of Responsible Media was formed, and more recently, a framework has come out of that around a focus on meaningful metrics from a brand perspective, but also from a societal perspective. And that also, equally important to that, is we've seen over, well, always, but I think very much so over 2020, brands changing their creative for kind of COVID reasons, or for diversity reasons, or more recently post-presidential debate reasons. And whilst that's really important, it's to understand that if you don't change your methodology throughout the process, then you're kind of falling at the first post. So that's kind of why we're here talking today. I think as a starter, obviously audience is kind of key, most essential to planning. But Deborah, has inclusion become even more part of your process and more part of your conversations with your clients?
100%. I think this year, 2020, has accelerated that conversation, and it's forced us, and I say forced because it's been an ongoing conversation at Essence internally and with our clients, but it's really forced us to be uncomfortable having those conversations with ourselves and with our clients. I think pre 2020, it was more of a case of we knew that this is something that we should be doing, and it was part of our agenda, it's part of our strategy, but we've seen this year that it's imperative to that. I'm sure as the conversation will evolve, we'll see examples of brands that have been agile and reacted to what's happened this year. But I think it's more important to realize that this is always going to be a conversation, that this is always going to be an ongoing debate, and there's no one right answer. I think that's what's become really clear to me, my team, and our clients that we work with, is that we know where we want to be. We know that it's going to be a bit of a rocky road, but we also know that there's no shut the door, we've figured it out. It's pretty much, not to use a media term, a test and learn approach, right? We may get it wrong, we may get it right, but society is going to continue to change. I use this phrase where I'm like, 2020 isn't done with us. It's been a phenomenal year, like good and bad, and there's still more to come. So it's how do we be agile enough to react to it? Because one thing that we don't know that's going to happen is uncertainty. Oh, you're on mute.
Brilliant. 6 months in and I'm still on mute, having trouble with that. Jackie, from your point of view, do you think we've seen that change reflected in the comms and the ads that we're seeing from brands?
I think there are changes coming through. I think the importance is that it's not happening on a superficial nature, that there's authenticity that sits behind it. I think it's really easy to be reactionary right now and pull out message of we're all in this together, which is wrong, or from my perspective, or we're looking at change. But I think brands also need to be looking inwards as well as outwards to their consumers, and they need to be making sure that they're making changes with their own processes, with their own structure, with their own diversity internally. I think it's also important to be brave with their kind of commercial objectives. If they're looking at historical data, which more often than not looks at success for an affluent or predominantly white consumer base, it's look beyond that and look at more community-based economy, which is rich and a really diverse base that they should be focusing on. That requires bravery of thought and commitment to that message. It's not just how I don't stop being, brown after this conversation. I am always brown. These people always exist. Diverse communities exist outside of just a 2-week campaign. So it's important to have that longevity and consistency of thought and communication behind it.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I was just going to add to that. I think that's a really great point, Jackie, because one of the conversations that we're having is the short-term impact and the long-term impact to campaigns and performance, and that's a really hard conversation, I think, for brands to acknowledge that actually our benchmarks are based on a different proxy, and if we're going to change, we have to be brave and confident that our CPAs might rise, and that's a really tough conversation to have. But I think it's also really important, because then you're going in all eyes open, knowing that there may be a hit short term, but if this is really what you're invested in, it will come to fruition long term.
Agree. And I think media agencies, sorry, Katie, need to not feel afraid to take ownership of that and challenge the brands and say, hey, okay, your brief is this, but actually you haven't thought about X, Y, Z. And I think it's okay to kind of hold them to that standard and push back on it. Certainly as a client, I appreciate it, and I've always appreciated where an agency has provided integrity of thought and offered me a different path that I might not have considered. And I think it's important that we maintain that kind of two-way communication.
It certainly feels that brands are much more confident or comfortable having those conversations and want to be sort of challenged on it. Certainly from a lot of the initiatives that you see in the industry. As something, and really this is Kayode and Paul from our end, do you think that KPI runs all the way through from to who you're buying from and how you're buying, but also the use of technology? Paul, I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So I think from the technology side, we're definitely seeing our big, kind of agency partners and clients, ask us about inclusion and diversity and how they can use technology and IAS tools to really kind of help them. And I think with that, we have seen a shift over the last few years from brand safety to suitability, and that's really been accelerated over the last 6 months since COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement. We're seeing brands take a much more kind of prescriptive approach to content and brand suitability. So an example of that, where they maybe used to use a very kind of blanket keyword approach and may actually have been inadvertently excluding some groups. They're actually moving away from that kind of blanket approach and thinking about how they can use technology to be a bit more kind of intelligent about how they target. And we're actually seeing agency groups kind of approach IAS and ask us to create specific segments to avoid negative sentiment around discrimination, racism, disabilities and sexual identity. So I think it's a real positive that agencies are actually kind of pushing technology in what's clearly the kind of right direction.
And is that sort of similar conversations that you're having, Kayode, with your clients?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. So, I mean, my personal point of view on this is within, I guess, the flow of any advertising campaign, there's so many touch points and there's so many stakeholders that are involved and so many different businesses that are involved. And then within that, there's so many different contacts that are involved. So I think when you have the start of like the ad creation, like the concept of the idea, which could be wholly inclusive, by the time it gets down to a business like MIQ, which typically on the other side of that, at the other end of that spectrum, that message is almost, or can be, completely lost. And I think communication generally is such a difficult thing for our industry, for any industry, when you're dealing with so many different stakeholders that need to be involved in the creation and the delivery and the activation of advertising. However, like, I think we've seen that in our industry, and particularly within media, it has quite detrimental, or it can have quite detrimental results in terms of representation and making sure that we're delivering responsible ads. So one of the things that I really would love to focus on within our industry is how to improve that communication between all the different stakeholders that are involved in the delivery of an ad. And I think, I know everyone kind of speaks about the good things to come out of this year, like it's obviously been a very like tragic year, but the communication, something that I've particularly seen within our business at MIQ as well, is communication has improved in a different way. It's improved globally, so we're connecting much better with all our global employees rather than just our local employees. We've shifted to more of a global structure to rather a local structure. And I think not just within our company, but within our industry, I think everyone's kind of working towards the same goal now, as everyone has this realization that actually there is a lot more important things going on in the world right now. There's a lot more important things that we need to support and to help. And I think in doing so, that actually we can use the means of communication that we've developed within the last year to actually help facilitate and improve that flow of KPIs between the ad creation to the ad activation. Like, if you can get all stakeholders in a room over a Zoom chat, which is fairly easy to do, as we've all done today, and then discuss like the concept of the idea and make sure that everyone's aware of the responsibility for each stakeholder and making sure that the ad is delivered in the right way to the right audience in a responsible and reputable way, then I think that actually we can improve that flow and actually make sure that that message is delivered from start to finish. And then also I kind of think that business leaders as well, they need to take a lot more responsibility in this and just kind of empowering employees and all the people within the business to push back on any time we see something that we don't deem responsible or unethical, empowering everyone in the business to push back and say, no, I don't think that this is the kind of right ad that I want to serve, or I don't think this is the right way to deliver it, or I don't think this is the right target audience, or I don't think the data is collected or used in the right way. I think like the more experienced people in the industry, they kind of have that confidence, but then I imagine if you're in an entry-level position or if you just joined the industry, you're not going to have the confidence to push back on an external party to say, I don't think this is right. So I think that really needs to come from seeing other people within the business, more experienced and more senior people within the business doing that same thing, having the confidence to push back on external parties, and then we should hopefully see that flow through to everyone within the industry.
It's a really good point, isn't it, on our businesses reflecting actually and making those changes, given we're responsible for getting those adverts to where consumers see them. I know, you know, our company, we've made sort of significant changes over the past sort of 18 months in terms of creating ERGs and, you know, removing things like CV degrees from job descriptions to allow for a greater kind of breadth of people to come into the industry. Jackie, you do a lot, as I said, with mentoring and the Bloom team, for which you talk to a lot of young talent coming through. Do you think like we're seeing improvements, or are they still kind of facing challenges within the companies that they work in?
So the short answer is yes, still facing a lot of challenges, because you can have a diverse workforce, but you need the inclusive culture to go with it as well, so you feel like you're working somewhere that's for you. The bigger disconnect, though, I think we've got is, yes, there's more of a diverse population coming through, and certainly within Bloom, what we're seeing is there's that disconnect between there's not a diverse senior base there. So in terms of from a mentor-mentee perspective, having someone that has got shared experiences, has someone that can help guide you, and kind of gets where you're coming from. It's not there. So that is a struggle. It's not going to go away, and there's no quick answer to it. But I think the other thing is, it's how you then keep these younger people within the industry. And we really need to understand why they're leaving when they are leaving at an earlier age or younger age. Where are they going to? Why aren't they staying within the company? And I think we tend to walk away from it really quickly. And okay, you know, this place wasn't right for so and so. Okay, let's just get another recruit in. Understand why it wasn't right for them and what changes can we make. It's like turning a tanker though, right? It doesn't happen overnight, and it requires a lot of course correction. But I think the other thing is, it requires absolute commitment from everyone. It's all fine and well to do some training, and then you step away from it and you forget it. You've got to live that training and live those learnings on a day-to-day basis, and be held to that standard and be called out on it when you're not.
I mean, that kind of goes back to Kayode's point about empowerment, doesn't it? And people feeling empowered. Deborah, from a group M and WPP point of view, you kind of stand out in terms of the changes that you're making, the initiatives you put in place. Do you feel like you're making headway with the teams?
I do think we are. I think it's, I always say it's a marathon, not a race. And I feel like we've been in that marathon and we continue to be in it. I'm definitely proud of like how WPP Group, and I think just probably more relevant, like how my agency is dealing with the changes that we need to make. And I think, kind of jumping on Kayode's point, a lot of it couldn't have happened without that senior leadership buy-in, and more importantly, the CEO buy-in. And I think that's a really important conversation that we need to be having when we talk about D&I initiatives, because I've seen it firsthand. Like, I kind of started up the ERG group for Black and Asian and mixed race essentials at Essence, and to have our CEO back that group, to have our CEO talk about it and to tell the business and leadership that this is an important initiative, it adds so much clout and weight, and it stops it being a thing that we should do to something that is important to the business. And through 2020, I've seen our CEO support and leadership manifest itself in ways that I personally never realized. And I've actually come to that realization that we will only see that change when CEOs and the core leaders of the business lean in and make it a priority. I remember saying internally to a few of our leadership team that were starting to understand that they needed to play a part. And I said, think of it like we think of our jobs. We don't sometimes know the intricacies of how media works, of how programmatic works, of how we buy search and social, etc. But we know that we need to find a baseline understanding to be able to speak to our clients and to speak to the industry. And it's pretty much the same with D&I. You know, you're sometimes never going to have that personal experience of what it means to be from an LGBT, to be LGBTQ, or to be Black or Asian, etc. But you just need to have a way of educating yourself around what the challenges are and have that conversation. So definitely proud of what we're doing, but I think it's one thing, I don't want to sit here and say like we've got all the answers, because I think the one thing that's been great about it is that leadership have been a bit fearless in stepping into the unknown and acknowledging that they don't know everything, but are willing to have the conversations and figure out through muddied waters what we need to do to make it better. And, you know, personally, it's great for me to have that support, because it's taxing on people. You know, we do have a day job that we have to do. This is a passion project, especially when it's very core to your being, like I think being a Black woman, you know, you feel it in different levels. So having our CEO actually, you know, put one-on-ones with me and say like, what can I do? Or just speak to me so I can understand it. I think it's critical to the success. So I think that's one thing that we as an industry should be talking about, is how are our leaders leaning in? And it's not about the ERGs leading the conversation, it's about leadership supporting those ERGs.
Yeah, just to add to that, so I completely agree with what you said there, Deborah. So one thing that I've always found a bit of a challenge, and particularly as in my position as on the D&I committee at MIQ, is how do we engage people who are indifferent to this? So people who don't have like a negative, who aren't racist, basically, who don't have negative agenda against people from marginalized or underprivileged backgrounds. And then obviously we have the support of allies within the business as well. But then it's that bit in between, people who aren't, it has never really crossed their minds that they needed to take action in this, as opposed to just being indifferent and letting it wash them by. And I think, personally, it's something that I've struggled with. I don't know how to engage those people, but I think one of the ways that it needs to happen, as you said, it has to come from our leadership, because the leadership, the way that they position the business, they point the North Star where everyone goes to. And it's going to take time. Like, it's going to take time for everyone to realize the importance of it. And you can always like list off the stats of like how increasing diversity within a business helps improve productivity and all this. But people don't feel that on a day-to-day basis. And because they don't feel that, then they feel like they're on the indifferent side of things and they have no motivation to really get involved. A lot of the personal stories help, but it shouldn't rely, as also you said, like, it shouldn't rely on personal stories and people having to bleed out their hearts to get people to realize that action needs to happen. It actually should be something that people should already be aware of and already be engaged with. So in that way, it needs to come from leadership who point where the North Star is, and then they point the direction of the business and everyone moves towards that direction. And in that way, hopefully everyone should come on board and be more engaged by the D&I issues.
To you, like, it's come up all throughout that is this idea of responsibility, and you know, we have taken, I think, like as an industry, we are taking more responsibility. Paul, from your point of view, obviously your role is working with a lot of the social platforms. How do you think people are using those? And Kayode, you talked about kind of personal stories and stuff. How people are using those to feel empowered, and the platforms themselves giving people, you know, taking some responsibility for that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, you know, social platforms have come under, you know, a lot of criticism, not just over the last kind of 6 months, but the last few years, of course, for, you know, in some ways kind of inadvertently harboring some hateful groups and some hateful speech. So there is pressure on them, and I think that pressure in many ways is right. But what is not talked about is how they can in some ways be a force for good. So I did see a story just a couple of days ago about the LGBT community taking over the Proud Boys hashtag. So I don't know if you're aware, but the Proud Boys are kind of right-wing group in the US. They took over the hashtag with pictures of gay pride and pictures of you know, pictures with their loved ones, which clearly would have riled some of the members of the Proud Boys group. So clearly, you know, it can be used as a force for good, and the platforms are you know, taking responsibility, and you know, whether or not that was, you know, Twitter removing a hateful tweet from Donald Trump recently this year, and they've got that, you know, Twitter and Donald Trump have obviously got a very kind of weird relationship, but they removed that tweet. And they've also, you know, Twitter have recently kind of banned the Trump account temporarily for false COVID claims. So you know, they're clearly going in the right direction, but obviously there is more to do.
And I guess finally, as a question to or an ask of the industry, what would each of your big asks be to one another, actually, and our clients and our partners, to improve and allow people to bring their authentic selves, their whole selves, unapologetically to work, because ultimately that will deliver greater results, right? So Deborah, if I start with you.
I think for me, it's being comfortable in uncomfortableness. I think as people, you know, we fear the unknown, and that Kayode made this point, sometimes indifference can breed kind of negative feelings because we just don't know certain cultures, we don't know certain people, and so I think for us as a community, as an industry, it's just being comfortable and being okay with I don't know certain things, but you know, just explain it to me. You don't have to like it, but just be okay with not knowing, and just knowing that that is not a negative feeling. It's just one of just opening up comfortableness for people to bring themselves to work. And I think maybe hijacking it, bringing it back to how we work as well, and the media we put out, is also seeing these audiences as people. I think sometimes it's easy to look at a media plan and say, I need to target a Muslim site or a Black site, but remember that we're targeting people, and that these D&I attributes are still part of who they are. They happen to be Black. And so don't think of it as a tick box and exercise, but think of it as an audience exercise, and just bring those D&I aspects into that audience strategy.
How about Jackie?
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with all of that. It's like Deborah's taken the words literally out of my mouth. I think on top of that, it's about being unafraid to have difficult and uncomfortable conversations. And I would say, and it's not just to white people, by the way, because there's a whole, race is complex. There's a whole history between brown people and Black people that we would need 10 days to go into. It's so, you know, if the questions that you're asking or the situation or the conversations that you're having aren't feeling difficult and uncomfortable when it comes to diversity, you're not asking the right questions, you're not having the right conversations. It's okay to be in that space. And I think it's giving people permission to say, look, it's okay to ask a question and don't feel wrong-footed, or have I asked it the wrong way? You know, people will appreciate open and honest conversation. And it's not a binary situation. I don't speak for all brown people. We're not all the same. And I think it's understanding the complexities and nuances of that. And it's because of all that there isn't one answer. You know, there isn't a kind of a golden star on this that will kind of resolve everything. You know, it's all layers. You know, women within industry have an added pressure versus men. You then put on being Black, you then put on being gay, you then put on being, you know, neurodiverse. That's a heck of a lot to kind of carry with you, and you can't deal with that on every day, you know, all those challenges. Sometimes you have to pick which one you're going to fight for. And my final point, I think, would be to say, be a strong ally. Just because you know, a diverse person doesn't speak up about something in the room, don't take that as acceptance that they're okay with what's just being said, or, you know, the look that's being given. It might be that they're just exhausted and they just don't have the capacity to deal with it that day.
Thank you. Kayode. Oh, I thought I'd lost you for a minute there.
Yeah, sorry. I tried to unmute myself and I just paused. Yeah, so again, yeah, I completely agree with everything that Jackie and Deborah have both said. Yeah, just to follow on from what they've said, one of the things that I think we really need to take out of the industry is stereotyping. It's like a cornerstone of our industry, that when you are planning in our industry, that when you try to understand who your target demographic is, you put them into a bucket. But actually, people don't belong to buckets. As Deborah said, like, everyone's an individual. And following up from Jackie's point about intersectionality, yeah, it's really important that you understand, like, the layers that make up a person, and it's not just I'm male, it's not just I'm Black, it's not just I'm Nigerian. There's so many things, and it's almost impossible to quantify all of those things into a media plan. So don't even try and do it. Just, you know, advertise your brand or your service or your product as honestly and responsibly as you can, and then leave the demographic side up to whoever reacts to it. Don't infer or assume a demographic, and don't have a bias within your advertising that then leads towards a particular demographic, because that's where a lot of the issues come from. And then the only other thing I'd say is, for businesses really, is to have no tokenistic gestures, and to actually really understand when they take action on an issue around inclusion, that they understand the reason why they're taking that action. So when you talk about things about boycotting, are you boycotting Facebook, or are you boycotting any sort of social media platforms because another brand has done it and you're jumping on the bandwagon, you think it's the right thing to do? Or do you understand that the damage that that brand is doing in irresponsible advertising to a community, and how that community is basically being structured and is being hindered by an institution to get the same opportunities or the same resources or the things that are provided to other groups? So it's really to question brands when they're taking action, and when they're releasing their diversity and inclusion reports, and when they say, this is what we're going to do, these are our milestones. are those milestones reflective of the actual issues of closing the gap in privilege, in addressing poverty, in addressing the gap in resource and opportunities between different communities and different demographics? Or is it just something that they think is, you know, is great to put on the front of their website, is to say, oh, it's a tick box exercise, we've done that? So yeah, one thing I'd love to do is just question brands and be like, why are you taking the action in D&I that you are taking? And in that way, I think it can be a sustainable way for us to kind of make sure that this issue is tackled in years ahead from now.
And I am conscious of time. I think kind of from everything that we've sort of spoken about, ultimately advertising, yes, it's good for brand awareness, but also it's where we can see ourselves reflected, and it's really important for a thriving society. And importantly for me, and I think for all of us, is it's important for a thriving industry, and keeping talent and retaining talent, to make it a continual interesting place for us all to be in. So thank you very, very much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it. To those of you in the audience, thank you for choosing this session again, and enjoy the rest of the programme.